Well, but you look at a butterfly and you think, man, that's pretty beautiful. It's like, yeah, that's sexual selection, boys and girls. Pretty good for the butterflies. They have that level of aesthetic capability.
That's crazy,
and they're insects, right? 1 part in a million. Symmetry really matters. So on the pornographic front, women, it was very comical to read this because, and I had read a fair number of Harlequin romances when I was a kid. My mom used to take them camping, so I read like 200 of them because they were always lying around. I just picked one up and read it. And then I had a client whose sister read the more pornographic versions of Harlequin romances because they have a more spicy line. So I read like 10 of those because I was curious. And then I, at least that was my excuse. And then, because I was dreaming about pirates and surgeons and vampires.
Yeah.
Anyways, the Google guys showed quite clearly the pattern of female pornographic fantasy preference. And it was basically Beauty and the Beast. It was like tough, surgeon, pirate, vampire, billionaire. There was one other category I can't remember. Maybe it was corporate. No,
was it CEO? It wasn't CEO.
No, billionaires that covers that. But like hyper successful male, tromping around, arrogant kind of guy.
But also someone ideally who will take care of you even when you're feeling sorry for something you shouldn't feel sorry for.
Yeah, well,
right?
the fantasy mounts, they have a couple of interactions. There's a fair bit of rejection. There's some underlying sexual tension. He realizes how beautiful she is. She kind of entices him into establishing a relationship with him and tames her. And then, there's some fiery sex that goes along with that. And then, so she's got herself her own monster. And then he serves her purposes in some sense, defense, and then generosity and competence and production. And that's all unbelievably deeply embedded. And it's rude to talk about it, but like, how about 50 Shades of Grey, folks? That was, I think.
Did you read that?
I read some of it. Oh, I didn't read much of it because it was
painful.
Yeah, well.
And everybody read it.
Yeah.
It's like I had secretly. Everyone I knew read it secretly, or not so secretly.
Yeah, well, it was a funny thing to see happen because it was happening, if I remember correctly, right at the same time as the Me Too movement. It's like, and that's that makes perfect sense psychologically, because if you get a reaction that's too far in one direction, then it calls for a fantasy in the other direction. It's like, well, sex only can take place between people of equal power, whatever the hell that means. Well, that's
sounds like a fun sexual experience.
Well, that's part of the reason why, relationships between, say, undergraduates and graduate students, or undergraduates and professors in universities, are hypothetically verboten, which I think, by the way, is a mistake, because are you an adult or not? Now, that doesn't mean it can't be manipulated, and it doesn't mean that there are reasons to step forward with propriety, and I'm not a fan of promiscuity or one-night stands or any casual sexual relationships for that matter, but it isn't obvious to me at all who has the upper hand in those sorts of relationships, because feminine youth and beauty and charm, especially allied with personality and intelligence, is a vicious and deadly combination. That's not nothing by any stretch of the imagination. It might be the highest status, what would you say, set of manifestations that there is. Because I would say, generally speaking, cultures value young women, like ideal young women, more than they value anyone else. They certainly value them more than they value, well, certainly the typical young men, but maybe even the atypical young men.
What exactly is the problem with casual relationships, and how are you supposed to find the person you need to be with without having them?
Well, I think, how about abortion? That's a problem. And so it's a minefield, obviously, any discussion of abortion. But one thing I can say about abortion that I think would generate no objection is you wouldn't give one to your sister for a present. Right. So whatever it is, it's not desirable. And how not desirable it is at minimum open to question. So I don't think there's any such thing as a casual sexual relationship. I don't believe that. I've never seen any evidence that that's the case. I think that there are people rationalize that constantly because they want to believe that short-term hedonistic gratification is ethically acceptable. And I don't think it is. I think that it trains you to treat yourself and other people as instrumental objects of short-term pleasure, obviously. Mm-hmm. Well, is that how you want to train yourself? How's that going to work you're going to have a long-term relationship at some point? How are you going to train yourself for that? Okay, so having said that, and then, how carefully should we conduct ourselves in sexual matters? I would say, well, as carefully as you conduct yourself in any matter of importance. And that stretches all the way up to the top, whatever the top is. You're going to treat the other person as if they're a divine locus of consciousness or a disposable pornographic entity. Well, those are the borders. Okay, but then you say, well, you have to practice. And there's truth in that. And how do you practice? And the answer is, well, that's one of the central complications of life, right? To get the balance between individual action and the whole domain of sexuality and reproduction right is perhaps there's no more difficult question, especially once you've solved the question of, do you have enough to eat tomorrow? Mm-hmm. That would be the next one that pops up. Mm-hmm. But I don't think there is such a thing as casual sex. I think that's indistinguishable from masturbation, which I also don't regard as a particularly heroic act. And so, well,
T-shirts, masturbation, right. Not a particularly
heroic
act.
And I think people have that sense, and I don't think that that's culturally instantiated, because in some sense we've done everything we can to eradicate every last vestige of sexual shame, which I think in the final analysis is impossible, because there are all sorts of reasons for the persistence of sexual shame that have nothing to do with cultural context. And still, it's a furtive and underground activity. And the reason for that is because it's suboptimal for all sorts of reasons. Well, how much motivation does a young man need to overcome his fear of rejection and establish a relationship with a woman? And the answer to that is, we don't know. But sexual deprivation could easily be part of it. Because to do something difficult, you need a lot of motivation. You need frustration working for you. You need fear working for you. You need lust working for you. You need loneliness working for you. To bind a man and woman together, especially if they're going to produce children, this is a very, very difficult thing to do successfully. And so anything that interferes with that is to be viewed with extreme skepticism. And that's undoubtedly part of the reason that shame around hedonistic sexual activities remains a constant, despite our best attempts to eradicate it.
I think I would also say, just from my experience growing up, especially in university, it's not like it's seen on the outside, having casual sexual relationships, as this fun thing. Mm-hmm. It's not fun.
No.
And nobody thinks it's fun, especially women. So if you're around other girls and they're like, oh yeah, I hooked up with this guy, none of you guys are actually enjoying that.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's a lie that women tell each other.
Yeah. Why?
I think because they think other people don't care. And because if you do it, it makes you feel bad enough that you're like, well, I don't want to look at that. Whatever's going on there, like maybe me feeling bad is not healthy.
Right.
Like I'm not, and
it means there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, or there's something wrong with you, right? And so it's like, and it's unpleasant enough that you're like, well, I'll just, keep going. It's already happened. There's nothing I can do about it. So it might as well be okay, because what am I going to do about it if it's not okay? Yeah. So and then, and I think this is pretty common for women in university to hook up with people, right? It's called hookup culture. There's Tinder, like it happens. But I like for anybody out there who's thinking maybe I don't want to do that. It's not fun. It doesn't make you feel good. It really makes you really lonely, right? It's not a good idea.
Why do you think it makes you lonely?
I think because what you're looking for is a connection with somebody. And you're getting this physical connection and you're not getting any emotional connection. And it's
right? And then there's the contradiction. It's a terrible contradiction.
Yeah, and
right?
it's...
Well, here's an interesting thing I used to tell my clients is, don't do anything with anyone sexually that you wouldn't talk to them about.
Seems
it's like, well, I wouldn't talk to anybody about that. It's like, but you'll act it out, eh?
Yeah.
So that's worth thinking about. Is you're not intimate enough with them to have a conscious discussion, but you're perfectly willing to blunder stupidly into it, and then risk the aftermath. A lot of that's fueled by alcohol too.
Yeah, like a lot of it is fueled, like all of it. Yeah. You're not going to do that. If we ever
wanted to have a serious conversation about sexual impropriety on campuses, for example, the first thing we'd focus on is alcohol. But we don't want to have a serious conversation about that because, we don't want to have, we don't want to have chaperoned parties like there were in the 1950s. It's like, having some older people around to keep the drunken orgy under control actually turns out not to be such a bad idea.
Especially people who are non-biased, right? Are unbiased. We're just there saying, well, this doesn't look like it's going well. Maybe I'll help this person out.
Yeah, well,
instead of a group of friends, they're like, no, do it. Like,
yeah, right. Well, which is exactly
a bunch of doorknobs running into each other.
Well, that's what you get with alcohol too. And alcohol is a drug that really radically decreases people's medium to long-term orientation, right? It really focuses you on the present, which makes it, if it's a good drug for you, it makes it unbelievably fun because it decreases anxiety and it increases likely opiate bonding and dopamine-mediated extroversion. And so, like, it's cocaine, heroin, and a benzodiazepine rolled into one. And so it makes you not care. And for pure hedonism, there's nothing better than not caring. Yeah. But alcohol is a catastrophe on many fronts because of that. And a huge proportion of violent crimes, exploitative crimes, rapes, a huge proportion of those are conducted between drunk people. And so, but I don't believe that there is moral casual sex. Because I don't think sex is casual. I don't think anything about it is casual. I don't think, that's what I think.
Yeah, fair. Okay, so kind of on that note, given that people just graduated, do you have advice for recent high school grads?
I think it's hard to overstate the importance when you're at a point of transition like that. So you're done being someone that you were, a school kid. You're done with that. And so that's an achievement, but it's also the end of something. It's the end of an identity, and it's a new beginning. So now you have a new beginning. You have a new beginning. You don't get that many of those in your life. Mm-hmm. If you move, if you switch jobs, if you make a radical life transformation, you may have that. Sometimes that's accidental. It's thrust upon you. That's different. That's harder. Sometimes it's because of opportunity, but maybe you get 4 or 5 opportunities like that in your life. So they're rare. You get to be someone new. Who have a vision. So when I started to puzzle this out, it was often because of talking to clients or students who didn't know what to do. What should I do with my life? I don't know what to do with my life. Fair enough. And that's not a very good question. What do I do with my life? It's like, what's the answer to everything? It's not a good question, right? It's too vague. So I suppose I answered this to some degree, at least initially, like a conservative person. I said, well, what other people do? Well, they have an intimate relationship. They have a family. So that could be your birth family, so you could fix that up. Or it could be, your new family, your kids, your wife. They have friends. They have a social community. That might involve civic responsibility, which is something we're direly lacking at the moment. You need a job. You need to take care of yourself mentally and physically. You need to educate yourself. You need to regulate your reaction to temptation. There's 8 things. Okay, so now you get to be whoever you want, but you have to want it and you have to aim at it. And so to do that, you have to have a vision. Part of the utility of literature is the provision of such visions. Negative, in the case of anti-heroes, positive in the case of protagonists. Who could you be? Part of the advantage of being educated in the humanities is that you can draw your models from the best history has to offer. And that's really what an education in humanity should present you with. It's like, here are the great people of history, and that's you in potential. And so that means you can establish a new peer group. In some sense, my peer group has always been the people whose books I most admired. And that's a reach, right? Because who dares to compare himself, herself to the truly great people of the past? Nietzsche for me, Dostoevsky, Jung, and then the classic philosophers like Plato and Aristotle and Kant and Hume, all these stunning people that were brilliant beyond conception. That's a high reach and presumptuous in some sense. But the point of a humanities education is in large part to surround yourself with peers of the highest quality. And so you do that in the world of abstraction, and the teachers are there to guide you through that if they only knew that. Mm-hmm. And then you also want to do that with your peers. So one of the things you want to ask yourself if you're graduating from high school is, well, now I'm off to do something else. Might be a job, might be college, might be trade school. It's like, I'm going to make new friends. What's a friend? What do I want? I want someone to tell good news to, who will celebrate with me. I want someone to tell bad news to, who will be upset that something bad happened to me and not secretly happy. I want someone who's aiming up for me and for them. Or not. Or do you not want that? It's like, what do you want if you're taking care of yourself? What would you want in a relationship? You need a vision for this. And we do an staggeringly appalling job of helping young people even understand that that's necessary. And I know partly why. I was very curious about this because I spent a lot of time with this future authoring program, self-authoring, part of the self-authoring suite, because we built a program to help people make a plan. And once we built the program, one of the things we found, for example, was that if you gave it to young men who were entering college, the few months before they went to college, they were 50% less likely to drop out in the first year.
Yeah,
it's crazy. For a 90-minute exercise, it's like, that's just... If the world had any sense, every single college would have immediately used that upon publication of our paper. But none of them did. And that says something.
Is that mainly just goal setting? Like, what do you want? Well, envision that and then...
I think goal setting's the wrong way to think about it. I think it's too narrow a conceptualization. I think that you need literally to imagine it. It's like you get to be who you want. Well, you need to run the story, like in detail. And if you're trying to predict whether someone's going to commit suicide, you ask them, well, have you ever thought about harming yourself? Well, sometimes. Have you ever thought about killing yourself? Well, the thoughts crossed my mind. Do you have a plan? Yeah, I have a plan. Well, can you tell me about the plan? Well, my dad has a .45 in the top shelf of his desk. I've seen it in there several times. The bullets are in the drawer next door. I thought, I could probably put that in my mouth in the bathroom so I didn't make too much of a mess, and probably do that in the morning.
That's
like, that's not good.
Yeah.
Right. That person's in danger.
That's quite a plan.
Yeah, because the dream has entered their mind. They've visualized it. And so it's not goal setting. It's much more like casting yourself in a fully fleshed out literary representation. It's like, what is your future? Who are you? And what you want to do is negotiate with yourself. It's like, just imagine, this is a gospel idea, right? That if you knock, the door will open. If you ask, you will receive. If you seek, you will find. And no one believes that. But I believe it's true.
Yeah, me too.
But it depends on what you mean by knock, ask, and seek. Because it means if you mean it.
Yeah, if your life depends on it.
Yeah, that's basically. Right. That's right. You're all in on it. It's like, you want this? What do you mean want?
You don't kind of want.
No, that's right.
You don't want for like 2 minutes of the day and then you get bored.
Right, right. And your right hand wants it and your left hand doesn't. And no, it doesn't mean that at all. It means You're going to make the sacrifices necessary, and you're all in on it. Okay, so then the question becomes, well, what's worth going all in on? And the answer to that is, ask yourself, because we know that life has an unbearable element to it. And so facing that forthrightly, say, life's suffering, man, and plenty of it. And so what might make that worthwhile? Well, what if I had someone I really loved, who I was really attracted to, that I was really in love with, that I was sexually entranced by? It's like, or what if I was that person for someone else? Because that's actually a better plan. What would I have to do to myself to hypothetically be someone like that for someone else? Which is a much better way of thinking about it. What if I had kids that I loved? What if I had friends like King Arthur had friends? What if I was part of a enterprise that was fundamentally changing the world for the better? It's like, would that justify it? Well, you have to ask yourself. And if it isn't everything you need it to be, then it's not a good vision. And you're in an impossible situation anyways. So why not try to do something impossible? It's not going to be, in some sense, it's not going to be any more difficult in any real sense, although it's going to require more dedication. It's not going to be any more difficult than just slumping along to the grave.
Yeah, not any less painful.
Well, yeah, you have to forego stupid short-term hedonistic pleasure, which is, God, anyone with any sense, like cocaine. It's like great for a week.
You're like 15 minutes.
Yeah. Not so good iterated over 20 years. No. Alcohol is the same way. Casual sex is the same way. Any of those, we all know this. There isn't anyone who doesn't know these things. People pretend, sex can just be for fun. It's like, yeah, right. What is just for fun? Name one thing, let alone something as complicated and as entangling as sex. And you also see this in the public culture. It's like, because in the universities, we have two things going. Same thing, violation of the principle of non-contradiction. Any sexual orientation of any sort or any practice whatsoever is to be encouraged in every possible way, with no holds barred and no limitations whatsoever. And every single sexual interaction between a young man and a young woman is so dangerous that you need a written contract before proceeding.
Maybe because everyone's being encouraged to do anything.
Well, you get one of those.
Yeah.
But not both. Because both of them can't exist simultaneously. And I'm much more prone to give credence to the danger side of it. It's like, this is no joke. This is your life you're messing around with. Or someone else's life. The person you're with. The baby that you produce. This is no joke. Mm-hmm. So you think that anything goes. It's like, anything doesn't go in a relationship. Anything doesn't go in a friendship. Anything doesn't go in a business. Anything doesn't go when you're alone in the woods trying to survive. There's nowhere that anything goes. And that to desire that is so narcissistic and so infantile that it's almost unexpressible. And that's our culture.
Yeah. Okay. So what are you looking forward to in the future? This is the last question. Then I'm letting you go. What are you looking forward to?
Being healthy.
Better. Yeah.
Not being on fire. I'll